In this particular segment, we'll focus more on the people systems than we will on those other systems. But be aware, please, that all of those design decisions, how you're going to keep track, how you're going to procure, how you're going to manufacture, massage, send out, distribute, sell, and so forth, all of those design decisions will have an impact on your organization's culture. Well, let's look at the systems and processes that relate primarily to the human resource issue. So when we think about human resource processes, the first thing that comes to mind is selection. So we could break selection down into two pieces. There's the recruitment. So the first question would be, where are the people going to come from that we choose to go into our selection process? So we could include a recruitment element out here. And then from the pool of candidates that you've identified, there is a selection process. What are the criteria upon which you choose the people who you're going to allow into the organization? In Jim Collins' terms, who are you going to allow on the bus? And then once you've selected people, the next issue is what kind of work are you going to give them to do? Now, in some organizations, this may be highly specified. In other organizations, it may be much less specific. The implication being that in our culture, you come in and figure out what your job is going to be and create a space for you. Even that differential will, of course, have implications for the kind of people that you should be selecting. If you choose people who have, for example, a low tolerance for ambiguity, and you put them in a system where they're supposed to create their own work design, you've got right off the bat a significant mismatch of individuals and design. Following work design, there comes the issue of appraisal. How are we going to assess the quality of work that people have done, if at all? So this appraisal process is a big deal because people are judged and being judged and judging all the time. And for many people, this is a difficult and threatening, intimidating process. For example, Jim Goodnight, the founder and chief executive at SAS Institute in Cary, North Carolina, makes an argument that performance appraisals have a lot of negative features. Nobody likes to give them. Nobody likes to receive them. They tend to be not timely, after the fact. They also tend to be inaccurate, relying more heavily on recent data rather than on all the data throughout the assessment period. And a corporate-wide assessment process takes a lot of time and energy and money for people to do this on a periodic basis. So, he says, given all of those factors, we're just not going to do them. So while SAS doesn't have a formal performance appraisal system, obviously they do have a way of informally or perhaps more by word of mouth, by team observations, keeping track of how people are doing. In one facility about which I wrote a case, it's the Aberdeen plant, which is now a part of the British Aerospace Systems Corporation in Aberdeen, South Dakota. They had an unusual assessment system where team members would assess each of the other team members according to the quality of the work they have done over the previous period. In most organizations, performance appraisals are done by senior managers looking at their subordinates. In some cases, they will use 360. They're really 360, not, I would say, a global assessment, because they typically don't include customers or suppliers in addition to superiors, subordinates, and peers. So there are a lot of design factors that go into creating an appraisal system. I've written notes and chapters in other places on this topic, but it's a big issue because it will have a significant effect on the organization's culture. At Nordstrom's, for example, there was a time when they would rate all of their employees based on their sales per hour and rank them and publish that sheet, put a red line across it where above was acceptable, below was unacceptable, and put that on the wall. Most companies would say performance appraisal should be confidential between the appraiser and the appraisee. It may go into one's human resource file, but certainly not going to be a matter of public awareness. Nordstrom's had a different set of VABEs about that, leadership VABEs again, and they made different kinds of decisions about that process. So you can see that regardless of the process, whether it has to do with financial control, with accounting, with operational systems or marketing systems or information sharing or not sharing, all of those decisions are going to be based on management's VABEs, their values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations about the way the world is or should be. And depending on those VABEs, you might get a system that's going to enrich and enhance and fertilize an organization's culture. On the other hand, you might get systems that are corrosive, toxic, and tend to dissipate and erode the energy in an organization's culture. So each of these design decisions are important. With regard to our discussion of human resource systems, after appraisal, then there's something about how are we going to reward people. Do we reward them with more money, with more titles, with green jackets, with trips, with year-end bonuses, with more time off? The whole structure of the reward system depends a lot on the kind of people that you've included. So again, think back to our earlier discussion about why people behave the way they do and the notion of career concepts. If you have been hiring people without paying attention to the proportion of linears, technical experts, spirals, and transitories that you have in your organization, your reward system might be skewed in a way that doesn't really match the proportionality of those 4 career concepts in your organizational population. So paying attention to how each of these elements relates to, connects with, and as we'll see in a moment, aligns with the strategic intent of the organization is a critical, important principle in organizational architecture. In addition to rewards, if appraisal is sufficiently negative, then there's going to be some kind of an outplacement process. Some organizations pay a lot of attention to this, others do not. You may have heard of organizations who have an up or out policy, and that produces a certain kind of cultural reaction in the organization compared with those where, because of bureaucracy or government regulation or actually executive VABE sets, it may be very difficult to get rid of people. Then there's the issue of organizational learning. How do we, for individuals, for teams, for our organization as a whole, develop learning processes? There are a number of books that have been written about the learning organization. Peter Senge at MIT has been a leader in that regard, one of 50 most influential management thinkers in the world. We can also think about individual learning and team learning, process innovation and adaptation as the organization moves forward. What kind of processes does this particular architecture have to facilitate, encourage learning? So organizations like WD-40, for example, treat that very seriously. They have all the way from putting libraries in the cafeteria to encouraging people to learn new ways of developing new products, where in other organizations learning might be neglected entirely. Not much thought about it. Training is only a necessary and costly evil. That's the first thing we cut when there's a downturn of some kind, which, by the way, then reduces your investment in human capital, social capital, and organizational capital, and therefore will have probably some negative impact in the organization going forward.